Thomas Everett is a man of precision, power, and silence. At 52, he runs one of the most prestigious private hospitals in Austin, yet he lives in a house where no one says her name, Vivian, his late wife, gone 8 years from the very halls he now oversees. But during a routine inspection of the pediatric wing, Thomas stumbles upon 2 twin boys playing alone in a hallway. When one boy innocently says, "Our mom says a woman named Vivian named us," Thomas freezes. That name, that voice. What starts as a passing moment ignites a deeply personal mystery, one that forces Thomas to confront a chapter he thought was closed. Who is their mother? Why does she carry Vivian's memory? And what if these children somehow are connected to the love he lost? As his carefully constructed world begins to shift, Thomas must choose between the safety of solitude and the vulnerability of connection. Stay with us as this emotional journey unfolds. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories that remind us, sometimes, the past finds you, right when your heart is ready. The soft click of polished shoes echoed down the sterile hallway of St. Everett Children's Hospital, muted by walls painted in calming shades of sky blue and sunflower yellow. Thomas Everett, founder and CEO, paused by the viewing glass of the newly built pediatric wing. His reflection in the window, gray at the temples, impeccably dressed, eyes weary from decades of relentless ambition, barely resembled the hopeful man who once stood beside his wife at this very location, dreaming of a healing space built with love. That dream had cost him more than he ever admitted. "Mr. Everett," his assistant called gently from behind, clipboard in hand. "The boardroom is waiting." Thomas nodded, but didn't move. Instead, his gaze lingered on a small scene unfolding down the corridor. 2 boys, maybe 7, maybe 8, were crouched near a vending machine, building towers from disposable coffee cups. One had freckles dusting his nose like cinnamon. The other had an unruly shock of blonde hair and an infectious laugh that cut through the hush of the hospital like a song. Alone, unbothered, and completely immersed in their world. They reminded him of something. No, someone. He turned and took a few steps forward, watching them more closely now. There was an uncanny rhythm to their play. Silent glances exchanged, movements in sync. Twins, identical. Yet, something in the way they mirrored each other tugged at Thomas's memory. It felt like standing at the edge of a déjà vu cliff. Just then, one boy giggled and pointed at the cups. "You're just like Mom, always knocking things over." The other laughed but shook his head. "Nah, Mom said I got that from Vivian." Thomas stopped cold. He blinked. The hallway seemed to contract, the soft hum of fluorescent lights sharpening to a buzz in his ears. Vivian. The name struck like thunder, unspoken for 8 years, yet forever etched into the fragile architecture of his soul. Vivian, his late wife, his anchor, the one whose absence still clung to him like fog. He stepped closer, careful not to startle them. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice catching despite his best effort. The freckled boy looked up. "Hi," he chirped, completely at ease. Thomas smiled faintly. "I heard you mention a name. Vivian. May I ask, who is she?" The boy tilted his head, then shrugged casually. "Mom said that's who gave me my name. She said she was her hero." Thomas's breath caught. His gaze darted from one boy to the other, processing the implications like a puzzle missing only one piece. They couldn't have been more than 8. The same number of years since he lost her. Before he could ask another question, a nurse appeared at the corner and waved gently. "Theo, Vince, time for meds." The boys stood obediently. "Bye," the blond one, Vince, called as they walked away. Thomas stood rooted, chest tight. Theo and Vince, twin boys, one named after Vivian. He turned to his assistant. "Cancel the boardroom." "But, sir," He was already striding in the opposite direction, toward records, toward answers. The hallway to the administrative records office was rarely traveled by anyone but staff, but Thomas Everett knew every corner of this hospital, down to the hallway tiles he personally approved years ago. Still, this walk felt heavier than usual, like wading through a memory. Vivian, he whispered to himself again, the syllables still unfamiliar on his tongue after nearly a decade of silence. At the receptionist's desk, a young woman named Kayla looked up from her computer, startled to see the CEO approaching without warning. "Mr. Everett, sir, how can I help you? I need the intake files for 2 pediatric patients, Theo and Vince, twins." His voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency that made Kayla sit straighter. "Yes, of course. Do you have a surname?" He hesitated. "No, I only heard their first names, and that one of them is named after my late wife." Kayla's eyes softened. "Give me a second." She typed rapidly, glancing occasionally at Thomas as though trying to gauge the weight of his request. After a few minutes, she printed a sheet and slid it toward him. "Sarah Ellis. She's listed as their mother. She was once a part-time nurse here, about 8 years ago." Sarah Ellis. He vaguely remembered the name. Not a face, but the file. Vivian had once advocated fiercely for a young nurse who had made a mistake on a shift, insisted she not be fired. Said the girl reminded her of herself. Resilient, stubborn, hopeful. "Thank you," Thomas said, already turning to leave. "I should have known," he thought as he walked toward the nurse registry. The twins were no coincidence. That name, their age, the likeness to Vivian's Grace, even in play. He found Sarah working the evening shift in the oncology ward. Her back was to him, bent slightly as she adjusted a saline drip. She moved with the calm assurance of someone used to carrying the weight of fear and pain without letting it show. "Sarah Ellis?" His voice echoed slightly down the quiet corridor. She turned slowly, her face registering shock, confusion, and something deeper, almost like guilt. "Mr. Everett? Yes. How can I help?" Thomas hesitated, then took a few steps closer. "We need to talk. About Theo and Vince. About Vivian." The moment the name left his mouth, Sarah's expression shifted completely. Her eyes welled with tears, not from fear, but from a sorrow that had long been buried under the demands of survival. She nodded silently and led him to the nurse's break room, empty at this hour. "I didn't expect you to remember me," she said as they sat across from each other, hands fidgeting with the edge of a tissue. "I didn't, but your boys—" They spoke her name, said you told them someone named Vivian gave them their name, and She did, Sarah interrupted softly. "Vivian saved my life when I had nothing. My husband had left. I was going to lose my job. I was terrified. But she let me sleep on your guest couch for months, fed me, encouraged me, told me I was more than what had happened to me." Thomas swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "She never told me. She didn't want to burden you. She said you were overwhelmed. She was scared you were burning out and didn't want to add to it. So I stayed quiet too." There was a pause, heavy and uncomfortable. Thomas spoke first. "And the boys, are they—" "No, they're not hers. They're mine. But I gave them the middle name Vivian because I wanted them to grow up knowing the name of the woman who gave their mother hope." A knot that had formed in Thomas's chest slowly began to loosen. "They're beautiful," he said quietly. "You've raised them well." Sarah smiled, wiping at the corner of her eye. "They're good boys, full of mischief and big questions, especially about the woman they were named after." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "They asked me about her. I didn't know what to say." "You could tell them," Sarah said gently. "Tell them who she was, what she meant to you. That would mean everything to them." He looked down at his hands. "I haven't said her name aloud in years, not even to myself. Maybe it's time you did." Outside the break room window, the pediatric floor remained quiet. The cleaning crew was mopping, soft lullabies playing from a speaker above the nurse's station. Thomas stood slowly. "I want to take you and the boys to dinner," he said. "Not as a CEO, as someone who owes your family a great deal." Sarah nodded. "They'd like that. They've never been to a restaurant with cloth napkins." Thomas managed a smile. "Then let's fix that." As he walked away, the name Vivian no longer echoed painfully. It resonated. Thomas Everett had hosted galas with senators, board meetings with billionaires, and award dinners in glass-walled ballrooms overlooking the Austin skyline. But nothing had ever made his hands tremble like holding the booster seat as Theo climbed into the restaurant chair beside him, chattering excitedly about fancy ketchup. Across the table, Vince was carefully folding his cloth napkin like a magician about to perform a trick. Sarah, seated beside them, looked at Thomas with a mixture of amusement and motherly exhaustion. "I warned you," she said gently, smiling. "They've never done this before. They think cloth napkins mean royalty." Thomas chuckled, a sound rusty from years of disuse. "I think I used to believe that too." The waiter approached and greeted them with a polished tone, but when Theo asked if the chicken nuggets come with a toy, the illusion of high society vanished, replaced by something far more genuine. Laughter, curiosity, joy. Dinner unfolded slowly, but richly. Sarah shared bits of her past, how she'd gone back to school part-time, took night shifts, how she juggled 2 growing boys and a healing heart. Thomas listened intently, not just out of interest, but need. This woman had been a thread in Vivian's life. Her story connected pieces of his wife he never knew were missing. Halfway through the meal, Vince suddenly leaned over and whispered, "Mr. Everett, was Vivian really your wife?" The question, though simple, cut through Thomas like wind across open skin. "Yes," he said softly, setting his fork down. "She was. She passed away 8 years ago during surgery. She was everything to me." "Was she nice?" Theo asked, mouth half full of mashed potatoes. "She was more than nice," Thomas replied, voice cracking slightly. "She made people feel seen, even when they didn't think they deserved it." Sarah reached across the table and lightly touched his hand. Her expression didn't carry pity, only recognition. The kind that comes from someone who's been buried under their own grief and had to claw their way back into the light. "You never talk about her," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "I didn't know how. After the funeral, I buried myself in work, built a children's wing in her name, but I never spoke her name. Not like this. Not where it mattered." Silence hovered for a moment, respectful and heavy. Then Vince pulled something from his little backpack, creased construction paper with marker drawings. "We made this after you told us about her. It's Vivian, and you, and us." Thomas took the paper carefully. 4 figures, one with glasses and a gray suit, one with long dark hair, 2 tiny boys, one holding a balloon. "It's beautiful," he whispered, genuinely touched. "We didn't know she was real," Theo said. "Mom just said she helped us a long time ago, but now we know she's kind of like family." Thomas looked up sharply, eyes watering. Kind of like family. The phrase cracked something in him, something that had long been sealed away by years of sorrow and silence. "She was the best part of me," he admitted. "And if she helped your mom, if she helped raise you in some small way, then yes, that makes us family." The boys beamed, proud as if they'd unlocked some great mystery, and in a way, they had. Later that evening, as they walked out under the velvet Texas sky, Sarah reached for Thomas's arm. "You know, I used to pray someone would help us like she did. When Vivian died, I thought the thread was gone, but you—" She paused, emotion tugging at her voice. You kept it alive without knowing. That means something. Thomas looked at her earnestly. I want to do more than just keep it alive. I want to honor it. You already are, she said quietly. They paused near the curb as the valet brought around her aging sedan. The boys ran ahead, chasing each other with shrieks of joy, blissfully unaware of the weight that had shifted in the air. Thomas turned to her, almost afraid to ask. Would you let me spend more time with them? Not as a CEO, as someone who wants to be around the people she once called home? Sarah looked into his eyes, saw no agenda, no transaction, just a man trying to rediscover what made life worth living. I'd like that, she said. They would too. And just like that, the first brick of a new foundation was quietly laid, built not from blueprints or profit margins, but from grief, hope, and second chances. The next morning, the hallways of Everett Children's Hospital buzzed with the usual rhythm, nurses on rounds, gurneys rolling past, the intercom humming soft instructions. But to Thomas, everything felt sharper now, brighter. The boys' laughter from the night before echoed in his ears, softening the clinical sterility of his world. He stepped into his office and closed the door behind him, the familiar scent of pine wood and paper bringing a flicker of comfort. He didn't sit. Instead, he walked slowly to the framed photograph on his bookshelf. Vivian at the hospital groundbreaking, shovel in hand, her grin wide and full of mischief. I met them, he whispered. Theo and Vince. His voice wavered on the names. Outside the glass wall, clouds were rolling in over the Austin skyline. He stood there for several minutes, unmoving, as if waiting for the answer to rise in the clouds themselves. Eventually, he turned and sat, opening his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed, Patient files, Theo and Vince Harper. He hesitated, then overrode his own privacy lock to access the archived HR files. Sarah Harper, pediatric RN, employed 2009 to 2017, resigned voluntarily. No red flags, no infractions. He clicked Notes. The memo chilled him. Personal emergency. Final shift assisted Dr. Vivian Everett, 4th floor ICU. Dr. Everett recommendation attached. He opened it. It was Vivian's handwriting, scanned from a lined notepad. Sarah is tenacious. Exhausted, but driven. Reminds me of myself 10 years ago. If I could write a prescription for courage, I'd sign it with her name. Thomas closed the file gently, as if it might break. That was the week Vivian died. He called his assistant, Lorna. I need everything we have on Sarah Harper, not just the hospital records. Can you reach out quietly? There was a pause. Of course, Dr. Everett. Anything else? He sighed. Yes. Clear my calendar for the rest of the day. By afternoon, Thomas found himself standing outside the Harper apartment again. The building looked smaller now, its crumbling steps and flickering hallway light more noticeable in the daylight. But it wasn't the building he was here for. It was the conversation he'd left unfinished. Sarah answered the door still wearing scrubs, her hair in a loose braid. She blinked, surprised. Thomas? Hi, he said, awkwardly holding a brown paper bag. I brought breakfast, or lunch. Honestly, I panicked and bought both. She laughed gently, stepping aside to let him in. You're a little overdressed for pancakes, but we'll allow it. The boys were at school. The apartment, though small, was spotless. Crayons lined up in color order, books stacked neatly. The framed photo of the boys and Sarah on the nightstand. Theo's gap-toothed grin and Vince's solemn stare. As they sat down with coffee, Thomas set the bag between them. I hope you don't mind. I needed to see you. I needed answers. Sarah's smile faded into something softer, more serious. You want to know why she never told you? Or why I never did? He nodded. Sarah exhaled. Vivian and I became friends after my divorce. I had no one, No family nearby, no job security. When my landlord kicked me out, she offered me her guest room. Thomas closed his eyes, imagining it. The home they'd once built together, open to a stranger while he spent late nights at the office chasing progress. I planned to stay a week. It turned into a year. She helped me through night shifts, through sleepless feedings, through every panic attack. She never treated me like a burden. Why didn't you tell me about the boys? That they were named after her? Sarah stirred her coffee quietly. Because grief makes people unpredictable. You were hurting, and I was afraid telling you would feel like manipulation, like I was using her memory, and maybe part of me thought, you needed time to remember who she really was, without the hospital, without the pressure. Her voice cracked, and maybe I was just scared you'd walk away, that this kindness, this moment, it would fade. Thomas leaned forward, voice low. I've walked away from too many things I shouldn't have. This won't be one of them. She looked up. Why now? He swallowed hard. Because they said her name like it belonged in their world, and I realized I'd spent 8 years erasing her from mine, but she never left. There was a knock at the door. Sarah stood, confused. Thomas instinctively followed. It was a reporter. Mr. Everett, the man said, raising a camera. Any comment on the allegations of favoritism involving your staff member, Sarah Harper? Thomas stepped protectively in front of her. We have no comment. The reporter's eyes narrowed. You've been seen visiting here multiple times. Is it true you're using your position to... The door slammed shut. Sarah's breath caught. What was that? Thomas turned slowly. The cost of curiosity in the public eye. But I won't let it touch you or the boys. I promise. She stared at him, shaken but steady. You don't owe us protection, Thomas. He stepped closer. I don't owe it. I choose it. And for the first time in years, Thomas Everett meant every word, not as a doctor, not as a CEO, as a man trying, finally, to do something right. The next few days unfolded like a quiet storm. Rumors, headlines, and online threads swirled across the hospital community. Words like favoritism, manipulation, and conflict of interest were whispered behind closed doors and exchanged in email threads that mysteriously excluded Thomas. He noticed it in the way meetings grew shorter, in how some board members stopped making eye contact. Even his assistant, Lorna, had begun to hesitate before knocking. But amid the noise, Thomas clung tightly to the only thing that felt honest: their dinners. Theo and Vince's laughter, the way they recited their school stories with animated gestures and interrupting voices. The way Sarah, even exhausted, still managed to smile at them like each word was a gift. Thursday evening, as they sat on the floor building a makeshift blanket fort, Thomas asked gently, Do they always talk this much? Sarah chuckled, carefully tucking in the corners of a quilt. They're unusually chatty around you. Usually they're glued to their books. Vince peeked out from under the blanket. Can we read about the moon again tonight, Mr. Everett? Thomas smiled, but it faded slightly. Of course. But just one chapter, all right? The boy nodded solemnly, disappearing back into the shadows of their creation. As Sarah stood to make tea, Thomas followed her into the kitchen, voice low. They asked about Vivian yesterday. Said they wanted to know what kind of stories she liked. Sarah stirred honey into 2 mugs. What did you tell them? I said she loved thunderstorms, that she used to dance in the rain with no umbrella. Sarah's hand paused mid-stir. She did that? Thomas nodded, a smile brushing his lips. First date. She soaked her shoes just to prove I was too serious. She sounds alive in your memory. She is. More now than ever. There was a knock at the door. Thomas instinctively moved toward it, heart thudding. But it wasn't the press this time. It was a sharply dressed man in his early 40s, holding a thin briefcase and an expression carved from stone. Sarah Harper? She stepped forward, puzzled. Yes? He handed her a crisp envelope. My client, Mr. Drew Forster, is petitioning for custody of his sons, Theo and Vince. You'll find the court summons inside. Have a good evening." Before either of them could respond, he turned and left. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. Thomas took the envelope from her trembling hands and opened it with careful dread. The words blurred as he read them. Allegations of instability, concerns about her finances, her living conditions, and her growing association with a man of significant power who may be manipulating the legal process. She whispered, "He hasn't seen them in 3 years." Thomas looked at her. "Then why now?" "Because he saw the news. Saw your face." Her voice cracked, and she sat heavily at the kitchen table. Her hands gripped the edge of the wood like it was the only thing anchoring her to the room. Thomas sat beside her. "You're not alone in this, Sarah." Her eyes found his, tired, but defiant. "He'll make it ugly. He always does." "Then we fight," Thomas said quietly, fiercely. "I have the best legal team in the state. We'll prove your fitness, your love, everything you've built." She looked down. "They're not mine by blood, you know. Drew and I had them through surrogacy. He's the biological father." Thomas stilled. "Does that mean—" "It means he thinks biology is all that matters. But I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who soothed fevers, taught them how to tie their shoes, and held their hands when they asked about the woman they were named after." Thomas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Then let's show them that love is more than DNA." A beat passed in silence. "Do you think Vivian would have helped me?" Sarah asked suddenly. Thomas's throat tightened. "She already did. She gave you strength when you needed it most. And now, she's giving it to me too." That night, Thomas returned home to find a box waiting on his doorstep. No return address. Inside was an old photo album, one he hadn't seen in years. It must have been packed away after Vivian died. He flipped through the pages, fingers brushing over pictures of them in med school, volunteering abroad, laughing in the early days of marriage. Toward the back, a folded note slipped out. It was Vivian's handwriting, dated just weeks before her passing. "If something ever happens to me, I hope someone finds this. Sarah is worth trusting. She reminds me of us in the beginning. Don't forget who you were before the world made you afraid to feel." Thomas read it 3 times, his chest aching with the weight of everything left unsaid. But now, perhaps, it was time to say it all. The next morning, the city woke beneath a slate-gray sky, the kind that promised either a downpour or clarity. For Thomas Everett, it was both. He arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, not dressed in his usual tailored suit, but in jeans and a navy pullover, something Vivian used to say made him look less like a corporate ghost and more like a human being. He moved quickly through the corridors, but not to his office. Today, he had a different destination. Downstairs, in the family resource wing, Theo and Vince were already sitting cross-legged on the floor, building a spaceship out of blocks. Sarah sat on a small plastic chair, reading softly from a children's book. Her voice cracked slightly when she saw him. He knelt beside the boys. "Hey, engineers, got room on that ship for one more crew member?" Theo beamed. "You can be the commander," Vince added, "but you have to wear a helmet made of pillows." Thomas grinned. "Deal." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of relief and quiet dread. The legal papers were still on her kitchen table, a bruise on the day. But for now, her boys were happy, and she would take every second of peace she could. After playtime, as the boys were led off to an activity class, Thomas motioned Sarah into the small waiting room nearby. He closed the door softly behind them and reached into his coat pocket. "I found this last night," he said, placing a folded letter on the table between them. "Vivian wrote it, about you." Sarah's hands trembled as she picked it up and read. Her eyes grew glassy as she reached the end. She believed in me," she whispered, voice thick. "Back then, I was just trying to survive. I didn't know she noticed." Thomas sat across from her. She noticed everyone, especially those who carried burdens in silence. They sat there in quiet stillness for a moment before Sarah asked the question that had been forming in the cracks of her doubt. "Why are you still here, Thomas? Really?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I lost the person I loved most without ever telling her enough. Because I've lived 8 years with a hollow echo in my chest. And because those boys carry her name like a lighthouse, I can't ignore that anymore." Sarah exhaled, slowly, painfully. "What if we lose? What if the court decides biology matters more than loyalty? Then we appeal. We fight. I will not let that man use his bloodline to erase the life you've built with them." Her lip quivered. "And if we win?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Then we raise them. Together." That evening, the hospital's board held an emergency meeting. Rumors had reached every department, and though most stayed silent, a few had begun to speak out, questioning Thomas's judgment, his impartiality, his future as CEO. As he stepped into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, all eyes turned to him. Behind him, Sarah stood, not hidden, but beside him, a deliberate choice. Thomas didn't take a seat. Instead, he placed Vivian's letter in the center of the table. "I won't waste your time," he began. "Yes, I've grown close to Sarah Harper and her sons. Yes, I've supported them, because they needed help, because I owe a debt I'll never repay. Not to them, to someone no longer here." He let the silence breathe, then continued. "My wife, Vivian, left this hospital better than she found it. She fought for patients no one noticed, mentored staff others dismissed. She believed that love, true, patient, inconvenient love, was what medicine needed most." He looked around the table, his voice firmer now. "If supporting a mother and 2 boys who've lost almost everything is a scandal in your eyes, then I welcome your judgment. But know this, I'm not stepping back from them, and I'm not stepping down from this hospital. We serve people, and people, last I checked, come with stories." The room stayed quiet. No reprimands, no applause, just respectful, reflective silence. Later that night, Thomas stood at the edge of the hospital rooftop garden, gazing out at the city lights. Sarah joined him, wrapped in her coat, a coffee in each hand. "You really meant it?" she asked softly. He took a sip, nodded slowly. "All of it." Behind them, laughter echoed from the corridor, the twins playing tag with a nurse. Their joy broke through the heavy stillness like sunrise after a sleepless night. Sarah looked at him, eyes shimmering. "They've started calling you Dad Everett. Just between themselves. I heard them yesterday." Thomas didn't speak, couldn't. His throat clenched with something sacred and unfamiliar. Gratitude, redemption, hope. He looked up at the stars, then down at the hospital that bore Vivian's legacy, and now, perhaps, something more. "Let them call me whatever they need," he said, voice thick with emotion, "as long as I get to be there when they do." The next morning, Thomas Everett sat alone in the hospital chapel, a quiet space rarely used, tucked between the pediatric wing and the administrative hall. Morning light filtered through the stained glass in soft, muted colors, painting the pews in gentle blues and golds. His fingers were clasped together tightly, elbows resting on his knees, eyes downcast. It had been a long time since he'd prayed. Years, probably. Not since Vivian. But now, with Sarah and the twins tangled in his heart and the past bleeding into the present with every look, every gesture, he found himself whispering silent questions to no one in particular. How do I move forward? How do I love them without failing? Behind him, the chapel door creaked open. Sarah's quiet footsteps followed. She sat beside him without a word. hands folded in her lap, mirroring his posture. "They told me you were in here," she said gently. "You okay?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I feel like I'm standing on a bridge between two lives, and I don't know which side to walk toward." Sarah nodded, her voice soft but unwavering. "You don't have to choose. Maybe this is your life now, a new one, built from both." Thomas turned to her, his expression full of ache. "I wasn't a good husband near the end. I buried myself in work. Vivian deserved more than that." "She knew you loved her," Sarah replied, instinctively reaching for his hand. "She told me once when I was crying after my divorce, she said, 'Sarah, the good ones always try to fix everything. Just remind them love isn't a project.'" Thomas blinked hard, tears stinging his eyes. "She really said that?" "She did," Sarah confirmed. "She believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself." A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of hospital life. Then Sarah whispered, "Do you believe in yourself now?" Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze forward again, then nodded slowly. "I think I'm learning how." That afternoon, a storm rolled over Austin, casting shadows across the hospital's expansive windows. Rain drummed against the glass like a steady heartbeat. Inside the pediatric playroom, Theo and Vince were building a fortress out of pillows, giggling between every fallen cushion. Thomas had just arrived with hot chocolate in hand, balancing the tray like a fragile science experiment. "Commander Everett, reporting for duty," he said with mock seriousness, causing the boys to burst into laughter. "Captain Dad!" Theo yelled, hopping over a pillow tower and reaching for a cup. Thomas froze. The name hit him like a sudden gust of wind. What did you just call me?" Theo blushed, shrugging sheepishly. "That's what we call you when you're not here. Is that okay?" Emotion swelled in Thomas's chest. He knelt down, wrapping both boys in a tender embrace. "It's more than okay." From the doorway, Sarah watched quietly, arms crossed over her chest, a soft smile on her lips, and tears in her eyes. Later, in the dim glow of the hallway, Sarah approached him again. "They're starting to think of you as theirs," she said carefully. Thomas looked at her, heart full but cautious. "And you? Are you?" She hesitated, then looked him squarely in the eyes. "I think I already have." They stood like that for a moment. Two people stitched together by loss, by love, by the long and messy road of healing. And then, without warning, the world outside shattered the stillness. News broke that evening. An anonymous tip had been sent to a local blog accusing Thomas of using Sarah and the twins for a publicity stunt. A photograph of them entering a restaurant together accompanied the piece, along with speculation about ulterior motives during the hospital's upcoming fundraising season. The headlines spread quickly. Staff whispered. Patients' families gawked. Sarah's phone buzzed non-stop with questions from friends and former colleagues. Her eyes filled with panic as she turned to Thomas. "They're saying I'm some kind of pawn, that I let you use my boys to make yourself look good." Thomas's jaw clenched. "You didn't do anything wrong. This is my burden to carry." But she shook her head. "No, this isn't just about you. They're dragging our family into this." Our family. The words clung to the air like music and warning all at once. "I'll go public," Thomas said. "I'll speak to the press, tell them everything." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Not yet. Not until we know who started this. Because whoever they are, they're not done." A long, tense beat passed. Thomas lowered his voice. "You think it was him? Theo and Vince's biological father?" Sarah nodded, her voice trembling. "He's the only one with something to gain. If he can make me look unstable or manipulative, he has a case for custody." Thomas's blood ran cold. "Then we'll fight," he whispered fiercely. "And this time, I won't lose what matters." The rain had not let up for 2 full days. The sky above Austin remained cloaked in heavy gray, mirroring the growing tension inside the hospital walls. Thomas Everett sat in his office with the blinds drawn and his laptop open to an unsettling tab, an expose-style article accusing him of manipulating a vulnerable nurse and exploiting her children for a humanizing image during a time of financial scrutiny at the hospital. His jaw clenched as he reread the closing line. Is Thomas Everett the savior he claims to be, or just another CEO hiding behind someone else's story? Who sent this? He muttered bitterly. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Janine, his assistant, peeked in. The press is outside again, 3 stations now, and HR says you're being requested for a statement. Thomas closed the laptop slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. Tell them I'll handle it in the morning. Sir, Janine said hesitantly, they're saying you're only close to Sarah to dodge questions about the hospital's charity fund. They even contacted Theo and Vince's school. Thomas's heart dropped. The boys? They're fine, just confused. But I thought you should know. That was the final straw. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the street where camera crews had parked in front of the children's wing. Anger simmered beneath his usually calm demeanor. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was personal. Someone had crossed a line, and he had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who was behind it. Later that evening, Sarah sat curled on the couch of her small apartment, arms around Vince while Theo leaned against her other side. She had just hung up after a stressful call with her lawyer. I should have seen this coming, she whispered. Theo looked up. Is it because of us? No, baby, none of this is your fault. But people are saying stuff, Vince murmured, that you're not our real family anymore. Sarah's voice cracked. You are my everything, and no one, not even the people yelling on TV, can change that. The doorbell rang. Sarah tensed before walking to the door, checking the peephole first. When she saw Thomas standing there, soaked to the bone, holding a large folder, she immediately let him in. You shouldn't be here, she said, handing him a towel. The neighbors are already talking. I don't care, he said honestly. I'm not here to hide. I'm here to fix what I should have protected. He opened the folder and placed its contents on the table. Emails, surveillance photos, and a legal document bearing the name Gregory L. McAdams. Sarah froze. That's your ex-husband's uncle, Thomas finished. He's been quietly building a case for weeks, filing motions behind our backs. He leaked the story. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. But why? He hasn't been in our lives for years. Because he's betting the court will favor blood over bond. Especially with your past divorce and part-time job. He wants custody. Her voice trembled. He doesn't even know the boys. Thomas's voice softened. But I do. There was a silence between them, thick with shared fear and rising resolve. What do we do? She finally asked. Thomas sat across from her, gaze unwavering. We fight back. We show the court what real family looks like, and we make them listen. The next day, Thomas called an impromptu press conference, not in a polished auditorium or boardroom, but in the hospital garden, where Theo and Vince often played tag. The reporters gathered under umbrellas, murmuring to one another until Thomas stepped up to the microphone. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. Instead, he wore a windbreaker, jeans, and a solemn expression. I've been accused of using a grieving mother and her children to humanize myself, of manipulating an image to distract from hospital matters, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. Here's the truth. I did not plan to meet Sarah. I did not expect to care, and I never intended to change my life, but I did meet her, and now I do care, and my life has changed, for the better. The murmurs quieted. I'm not here to polish my name. I'm here to protect 2 children who call me Dad Everett and a woman whose resilience inspires me more than any boardroom victory ever could. If standing beside them costs me reputation points, then so be it. But let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere." He stepped back. Cameras flashed. Reporters yelled questions. But Thomas ignored them all, walking away to find Sarah and the twins waiting by the entrance. Theo ran to him first. "Were they mean?" the boy asked worriedly. Thomas knelt beside him. "Not today." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You didn't have to do that." He looked up at her, sincerity pouring from his gaze. "Yes, I did. For you, for them, for us." Later that night, as the rain finally gave way to stars, Sarah tucked the twins into bed. In the hallway, Thomas lingered near a framed photo of Vivian. Her eyes sparkled with the same clarity they always had. Sharp, loving, brave. He touched the frame gently. "I'm doing my best, Viv." Sarah stepped beside him. "She'd be proud of you." He turned to her, eyes raw with emotion. "I hope so." And as the night settled softly around them, for the first time in years, Thomas Everett didn't feel like he was alone in the world. He felt like he was finally home. The courtroom was smaller than Thomas had imagined. It smelled faintly of wood polish and old books, and the overhead lights hummed with a low buzz that seemed to mirror the tension in his chest. Sitting at the petitioner's table, he could see the twins fidgeting beside Sarah, both dressed neatly in matching navy sweaters. Theo clutched a tiny, well-worn dinosaur toy in his lap. Vince stared intently at the judge's bench. Thomas sat behind their attorney, trying to appear composed while every muscle in his body ached with nervous energy. He'd testified in front of investors, given keynote speeches at medical conferences, even addressed the State Board of Health, but never had his voice felt more fragile than it did today. Across the aisle sat Gregory McAdams, the boy's distant great-uncle. He wore a conservative brown suit and glasses perched low on his nose, like an old professor trying to look respectable. But his eyes were calculating, and his lawyer wore a smug expression that made Thomas's stomach churn. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and perceptive eyes, entered and sat down. The courtroom rose, then settled, and with that, the hearing began. "Your Honor," McAdams's lawyer began smoothly, "we are here today because my client is deeply concerned about the well-being of his great-nephews. He believes the boys should be in the custody of a blood relative, not under the influence of a corporate magnate with a questionable record of emotional detachment." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Our concern," the attorney continued, "is that Mr. Everett's sudden interest in the boys coincides suspiciously with media scrutiny over his hospital's finances. We believe this arrangement is less about love and more about damage control." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Sarah leaned toward Thomas, whispering through gritted teeth, "They're trying to paint you as a publicity stunt." "I know," he murmured, "but we came prepared." Their attorney rose. "Your Honor, the suggestion that Mr. Everett's involvement with Sarah and her children is rooted in image management is not only unsubstantiated, it's insulting. We will show through testimony, written documentation, and personal statements that his role in these children's lives is real, heartfelt, and grounded in genuine care." The judge nodded slowly. "Let's proceed." Thomas took the stand first. Under oath, his voice trembled at the start but quickly settled into quiet strength. "I didn't plan to become part of their lives," he admitted. "But from the moment I heard Theo say my late wife's name in that hospital hallway, something shifted inside me. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it became memory. And then it became love." He recounted the story, how he'd met the boys, the discovery of Sarah's connection to Vivian, and how his presence in their lives had started with simple dinners and ended with bedtime stories and helping with homework. "People say I'm a builder of hospitals," he added, eyes glistening. "But the truth is, I've never built a home. Until now." Next came Sarah. She sat up straighter than usual, her voice unshaking. I didn't go looking for a father for my boys. I was managing fine on my own. But Mr. Everett, Thomas, he showed up. Not with promises, with presence. He listened. He stayed. He became someone my children trust. She reached into her purse and pulled out a letter, unfolding it with reverent care. "This is from Vivian," she said quietly. "Written the night before her final surgery. She gave it to me when I was just a nurse with nowhere to go." The courtroom fell silent as the attorney read aloud, "Sarah, if something happens to me, I need you to remember this. You matter. And if, by some miracle, Thomas ever finds you again, tell him he'd make a better father than he thinks." Tears fell freely down Sarah's cheeks, and Thomas, who had never seen that letter until now, felt the breath knocked from his lungs. When it came time for the boys to speak, the judge was cautious. "Only if they're comfortable," she instructed. Theo walked up first, his steps small but confident. "I don't remember my real dad," he said softly. "But I remember the day Mr. Everett brought grilled cheese to the hospital, and I remember when he helped us build a birdhouse and didn't even get mad when I messed up the nails." Vince followed, dragging a piece of paper with him. It was a drawing, stick figures under a big tree with the words "Our Family" written in blue crayon. "This is us," he said, pointing to the figures. "That's Mom. That's me and Theo. And that's Mr. Everett. He fixed my robot. And he fixes stuff when I'm sad." The judge leaned forward. "And how do you feel when he's around?" "Like it's safe," Vince whispered. After a long recess, the judge returned. She looked at Gregory McAdams and spoke plainly. "Biology does not equal parenthood. What I've heard today is a story not of convenience, but of commitment." She turned to Sarah. "You remain the primary guardian." Then to Thomas. "But I'm granting you co-guardianship as their legal guardian partner. Continue showing up. These boys are worth it." The gavel came down, and for the first time in years, Thomas Everett exhaled, not as a CEO, not as a widower, but as a father. The sun peeked through the blinds of Thomas Everett's study the next morning, casting long beams of soft gold across the floor. The house, once solemn and echoing with silence, now bore the unmistakable marks of life. Forgotten socks near the couch, crayon drawings taped proudly to the fridge, and the occasional sound of twin laughter tumbling down the hallway like music he hadn't realized he missed. Thomas sat at his desk, a large mug of lukewarm coffee in one hand and in the other, Vivian's letter. He'd asked Sarah for a copy after the hearing. She'd handed it to him quietly, saying only, "She wrote it for a reason." Now, reading each line slowly, deliberately, he allowed himself to hear her voice again, strong, encouraging, full of warmth. "Protect her. You'd make a better father than you think." He hadn't been ready to believe those words when Vivian was alive, but now he felt them deeply. Her letter was not just a message, it was a blessing, a bridge from the past to a future he never imagined having. Later that afternoon, Sarah found him in the backyard, watching Theo and Vince chase each other with squirt guns around the small garden Thomas had recently started. Marigolds lined the fence. Vivian used to love marigolds. "You okay?" she asked gently, pulling her cardigan tighter. Thomas nodded slowly. "I thought yesterday would feel like a finish line, but it doesn't. It feels like the beginning of something more important." She smiled, stepping beside him. "That's how family starts. Not with a bang, but with a decision. To stay." He looked at her, quietly touched. "You've said that before." "I know," she replied softly. "And I meant it every time." That evening, they gathered in the backyard again, this time around a small fire pit. Sarah made grilled cheese sandwiches, just the way the boys liked them, cut diagonally with the crusts off. Theo declared it a family dinner, insisting everyone go around the circle and say one thing they were thankful for. "I'm thankful Mom said yes to dinner," Vince offered proudly. I'm thankful Dad Everett builds cool stuff and lets us use his markers. Theo grinned. Thomas blinked at the title. Dad Everett. It had slipped out naturally, without coaching or correction. Just a child's instinctive truth. He swallowed hard. I'm thankful I got to meet both of you. And your mom. Sarah's eyes shimmered under the string lights. Then Vince reached into his hoodie and pulled out something folded carefully. A card. Handmade. Glitter on the edges. Inside, 2 stick figures held hands beside a tall man with gray hair and glasses. This is you, he pointed. I made it with the art teacher. Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came. Only a slow, reverent nod as he drew the card to his chest. The next morning, Thomas entered his office at the hospital for what would be the final time in a long while. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the city skyline, his name embossed in the silver lettering on the wall behind him. He remembered how hard he'd worked to get here, how many years he'd spent chasing success, prestige, power, and how little any of it meant compared to hearing a child say "Dad" for the first time. When the board arrived, he stood before them with calm resolve. I'm stepping down as CEO, he said, his voice steady but not cold. Effective immediately. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. I'm not leaving because of the audit, he continued, or the media. I'm leaving because I finally found something I can't delegate, being present, being accountable, being a father. No one argued. They saw the clarity in his eyes, the sincerity. The next day, he packed up the last box from his office and drove across town. Not to a boardroom, but to the community clinic Sarah had always wanted to open. He'd bought the building quietly 2 weeks ago. Renovations were already underway. A brass plaque would soon hang above the door, the Vivian Rose Wellness Center, named in honor of the woman who'd believed in people before they believed in themselves. As Sarah stood beside him that afternoon, overseeing construction with a clipboard and her ever-steady focus, Thomas turned to her. This was your dream, he said. She shook her head, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Vivian's faith made me brave, but you made it real. He didn't need to reply. Instead, he picked up a paint roller and began helping coat the lobby walls a soft lavender, the boy's favorite color. From the hallway, Theo peeked in. Are we almost done? He asked excitedly. Miss Ruth said we can hang our drawing when the paint dries. Almost, Thomas grinned. Want to help? The boy nodded furiously and dashed off to get Vince. That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah found Thomas sitting outside, watching the stars with a blanket draped over his lap. You're quiet, she whispered, sitting beside him. He nodded, then turned to her with quiet gratitude. For the first time in years, I'm not wondering what's next. I'm living it. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And in the silence between them, something unspoken settled gently into place, like the soft hush of marigold petals falling into soil that finally knew what it meant to grow. The weeks that followed were the kind that unfolded quietly, steadily, like a gentle tide washing over sand that had long forgotten how to stay soft. Thomas Everett had once lived by appointments and alarms, crisis calls and spreadsheets, but now he lived by school drop-offs, lunchbox notes, and the sound of laughter echoing through a house that had known only silence for too long. Theo had claimed the left side of the couch as his official robot design zone, while Vince preferred to sprawl across the carpet, drawing imaginary cities with crayons and making up stories with voices. Thomas watched them often, not as a guest in their world, but as someone slowly being written into their chapters. One Sunday afternoon, Theo tugged at his sleeve while he trimmed roses in the backyard. Dad Everett? The name still startled him every time, but he had stopped correcting it weeks ago. Yes, buddy? Do names last forever? Thomas paused, the shears hovering over a bud that hadn't yet opened. What do you mean? Well, Theo began thoughtfully. Mom said I was named after someone important, and that we keep names so we don't forget. But what if I want to add a name? Thomas crouched beside him, heart thudding gently. What name would you add? The boy hesitated, then whispered, Everett, so I could be like you. Thomas felt his throat tighten. You already are, he said, voice thick. But if that's something you want, we'll talk to Mom. Together. Inside, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, her eyes misting over as she listened. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but some moments catch you off guard, and this one rooted her in place with quiet awe. Later that night, as she sat with Thomas on the back porch, she brought it up. They want to be seen, she said softly, not just by you, but as yours, fully. Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. I want that too. I didn't expect to, but I do. She took his hand gently. Then let's do it. Not just legally. Let's make it real in every way that matters. 2 weeks later, standing before a judge in a modest courtroom, Thomas held both boys' hands. The boys wore matching navy blazers and clip-on ties, gifts from Sarah's aunt, and looked up at him like he was the whole sky. Sarah sat beside them, calm but watchful. She had reviewed every document, every clause, ensuring this was a full guardianship agreement, not temporary, not conditional. The judge, a kind woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much and not enough, adjusted her glasses and asked simply, Mr. Everett, are you prepared to become the legal guardian and adoptive parent of Theo and Vince Coleman? Thomas cleared his throat. I am. And do you understand the responsibility this entails? Not just materially, but emotionally, spiritually, and with unwavering presence? I do, he said, his voice steady. I've spent my life building a world of precision. Now, I want to build a world of love. A silence passed like sunlight through a quiet cloud. Then by the authority of this court, the judge said warmly, I grant this adoption. Congratulations, Mr. Everett. You are now, in name and law, their father. Theo grinned so wide his cheeks ached. Vince clapped softly, as if afraid it might be a dream. Sarah leaned in, brushing a tear from Thomas's cheek. Welcome home, she whispered. Back at the house, a celebration unfolded in the backyard. Friends from the hospital, nurses who'd once worked with Vivian, even some of Thomas's former board members came by, surprised, yes, but genuinely moved. Under a string of soft lights, a small easel held the latest drawing from the boys. 3 stick figures, Thomas, Theo, and Vince, standing in front of a house with big windows and a garden of orange marigolds. Above them, written in careful block letters, Our family, real, forever. Sarah added the drawing to the living room wall, next to a framed photo of Vivian smiling in scrubs. She would have loved them, Sarah said quietly. I know, Thomas replied, and she'd love you too. Later that night, the twins curled up on either side of Thomas on the couch, their breathing slowing into the soft rhythm of sleep. Sarah brought over a quilt, tucking it around them. You look like you were made for this, she said. I was made for spreadsheets and boardrooms, he joked lightly. No, she said, sitting beside him. You just didn't know what else you were capable of. He reached for her hand again, this time with quiet certainty. I do now. As the fire pit outside crackled in the dark and the stars blinked overhead like tiny blessings, Thomas Everett exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, not from stress or grief, but from contentment. This wasn't the life he planned, but it was the life he chose. The sun dipped low behind the trees as laughter echoed from the backyard of Thomas Everett's home, once a cold, echoing space of memory, now vibrant with life. Lanterns flickered above tables decorated with simple yellow daisies, and a handmade banner read, Family Picnic, officially ours. Theo and Vince ran barefoot across the grass, their knees grass-stained and their voices shrill with joy. A plastic soccer ball zipped past Sarah's chair as she chuckled, shading her eyes to track their latest game. Thomas stood near the grill, his sleeves rolled up, spatula in hand, the scent of burgers wafting through the air. He looked utterly content, grounded, fulfilled in a way that no award, merger, or hospital milestone had ever made him feel. "Burning the edges again?" Sarah teased, walking over with 2 lemonade glasses. "I call it crispy by design," he replied with a crooked smile. They clinked glasses gently, standing side by side. From the deck, one of Thomas's longtime nurses snapped a candid photo of the moment. No posing, no performance. Just 2 people standing in the warmth of something real. Inside, the living room had been rearranged for the occasion. On the wall, framed artwork by Theo and Vince hung like priceless masterpieces. Beneath them sat a small wooden chest labeled Vivian's Letters. Thomas had finally opened the last of them. In her graceful handwriting, one message stood out. "You don't have to fix everything. Just show up. That's all they'll ever need from you." Now, he understood. That evening, the group gathered around the backyard fire pit. Sarah brought out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Vince. "Go on," she urged gently. "Read it, just like you practiced." Vince, cheeks pink from the attention, cleared his throat and stood tall beside his twin. "This house used to be quiet," he began, voice steady. "And sometimes we felt like maybe no one was coming, but then—" He looked at Thomas, who sat forward, elbows on his knees. "Then you did, and we weren't alone anymore." Theo stepped forward, unfolding his own page. "So, we drew this," he added, holding up a large piece of paper. It was a sketch of their family, Thomas in the middle, Sarah beside him, and the twins holding a kite between them, its string wrapped around all their hands like a bond. At the bottom, written in bright blue crayon, were the words, "We weren't alone. We were waiting for you." Thomas swallowed hard, emotion catching in his throat. The world tilted, not from grief, but from fullness. He stood, opened his arms, and the boys flew into them without hesitation. "I love you," he whispered into their hair, "more than I ever thought I could." "We know," Theo replied simply. Sarah stepped in, wrapping all 3 in a warm embrace. They stood there, a human constellation under the early stars, messy, imperfect, entirely real. Later that night, after guests had gone and the boys were tucked into bed, Thomas wandered into the kitchen where Sarah was finishing the dishes. He took the towel from her gently. "Let me." She smiled and leaned against the counter, watching as he dried the last of the plates, methodically, carefully, like it mattered. When he was done, he turned to her. "I used to think love was something that had to be earned," he said softly, "or something you lost if you made a mistake. And now I know it's something you return to, if you're lucky enough to get the chance." She stepped closer, brushed a strand of gray from his forehead. "And what will you do with your second chance?" He didn't hesitate. "Everything." Months later, at a school open house, a teacher approached Thomas as he studied a robotics project with Vince's name proudly written on the side. "He talks about you all the time," she said kindly. "He calls you his forever parent. Said you showed up with tools and stayed to build a life." Thomas smiled, blinking away emotion. "That's about right." The boys thrived. Theo had taken up piano, Vince had joined the science club. Sarah returned to work part-time at the hospital, but every evening they gathered at the same table, where meals and stories flowed freely. No ghosts, just growth. Vivian's photo remained in the hallway, never hidden, always honored, and beneath it hung another frame now, one that Sarah gifted Thomas on his birthday. Inside was the boy's drawing. And, beneath it, in Sarah's neat handwriting, a simple message. Home isn't where you start, it's where you choose to stay.